welcome everybody to HLS Week. My name's Anna, I'm Chief Exec of Collaborate, and I'm so excited to be hosting the launch event for this brilliant week of free events that we've got organised over the coming days. It's so exciting to have finally got to this point after months of hard work, but also it's so exciting to see so many people here today. I think from across a range of sectors, different kinds of organisations, even different countries. I think at this point we have over 600 people signed up across the week and over 3,000 session signups. And I think that the reason why I find that personally so sort of exciting and energising is just that it's such a strong sign of the energy and the commitment and the drive and the passion that does exist out there, even in such challenging times, to build services and ways of working and supporting people that are more human, more adaptive and more collaborative so that everyone can flourish. It's really important to me as Chief Executive Collaborate, and I know it's really important to my chair, Victor, who's going to speak in a moment, that we do things like this as Collaborate and that we're doing this week of events. Collaborate was set up by Victor to support the creation of this practice on the ground. We work with a number of you who are here today, but also by building a movement of people, by connecting people, by finding ways to share learning, and also to find solidarity in such challenging times and to get through the challenges that you face in terms of bringing this to life on the ground. So what's HLS? Where's it come from? HLS has been something that we've been working on for a number of years now. We published the first report about 5 years ago and several since, working alongside many brilliant partners, including Toby Lowe, who will be participating in many of the events across this week. HLS is a different way of doing things. It's about a different way of thinking about how we create change in complex systems in people's lives. It doesn't shy away from that complexity or try to simplify or control it. It engages with it head on. It's also really critically a description of practice that is already out there. We haven't been sitting in a dark room for the past 5 years trying to think about, what the future of public services and social change should look like. We've been talking to brilliant, pioneering, brave and creative practitioners right across the country, across all sorts of different organisations and sectors, to understand what you are actually doing that is different, and to try and find ways to describe it, to create a language that expresses what's different about it, why it's different, why it works the way that it does, why this might be important as we go forward and think about the future. And that's why it's really exciting that we've got 3 of those brilliant practitioners here today who are going to share their stories with us and bring all of this to life. HLS is also a collaborative of organisations working together to try to create that new story, and increasingly to create tools and frameworks and methodologies and stories that help bring this to life and help more people put this way of working into practice. And as I said at the beginning, it's a movement of people. It's everybody who's here today and everyone who is joining these events over the course of the week. So today's launch event for this week is going to run like this. In a moment, I'm going to pass over to Collaborate's chair, Victor Adebowale, who's going to share his personal perspective on all things human learning systems. And then we're going to be joined by 3 practitioners, as I said, people who are trying to do this in their work, and who all in different ways have been a really important part of the HLS journey since the beginning, either doing the work of trying to reshape, change and support and services themselves, or by supporting others who are doing that. And they will each give us their own personal perspective on why HLS matters to them, what they're doing with it. And each of them are going to focus on a different aspect, the human, the learning and the system. And then hopefully we will have some time for some questions and some discussion. So if you do have questions for our speakers, please feel free to put them into the chat through the session, and we'll do our best to get them answered. If we don't get them all answered, a number of us are participating in other sessions across the week with a bit more time as well. I know Alex is doing one tomorrow or on Wednesday, so please do look out for other sessions that these speakers are participating in. And then when we've heard from everyone, there'll be a brief introduction to the rest of the week and how that's going to work from my colleagues at Collaborate, Dawn and Naomi. So once again, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to the brilliant Collaborate team who've put so much work and time and effort into pulling all of this together over the last few weeks and months. Thank you to Tudor Trust, who have provided financial support for creation of learning spaces and infrastructure around HLS. And thank you to all of the partners and the speakers and the different facilitators who are participating this week. And now I'm going to hand over to Victor. I'm going to give a quick introduction before I do. I'm sure he's well known to most of you, but for anyone who doesn't know Victor, he's somebody who's worked throughout his entire career in multiple roles to bring about change in the way that services and systems work, particularly for the people who need them the most, whether it was as Chief Exec of the big charity Turning Point, currently as Chair of the NHS Confederation, or as founder of Collaborate, among many other things. So over to you, Victor.
Thank you, Anna. What a lovely introduction. That's really kind of you to say those things. Collaborate is one of the things I'm most proud of. I love the work that you and your colleagues do. It's, I suppose it's to the heart of what I think is important about services to the public, and the methodologies that you develop and your practice, I think, are the future of services to the public that we need to engage with. Why Collaborate? Because when I set Collaborate up, I was concerned and still continue to be concerned about a kind of, well, three things really. A negative debate about public services, one that was always sort of draining of ideas and engagement with people who need public services the most, services to the public, which includes some things that you wouldn't consider to be public services actually, like provision of food, for instance, or indeed utilities like the internet. That's why I use the term services to the public. But the sort of sense that we were on a spiral down, that we weren't really encouraging inquiry as to what these services are, what they should be doing, and how do we impact on them in such a way as to reverse the inverse care law, which states that those people in need of such services tend to get them the least, and that does us all harm. So that's why I set up Collaborate, and I'm very lucky to have found a leader like you, Anna. I don't want to embarrass you, but you know, I think you're great, and I think your team is damn cool. But enough of all that. The purpose of these events is to really focus on the practice. How do we make change in complex systems? I've never been afraid of complexity. You may have noticed I'm a 6-foot black guy in this country. Welcome to my life. It's a real thing. Complexity is something I've lived with, I've observed, I've managed, I've led. It is the nature of many things. There are very few things that aren't complex, actually. And services to the public, large, complex, adaptive systems. What do we know about large, complex, adaptive systems? Small changes can make major differences. And what's the smallest change you can make? It's a relationship with an individual. How do you develop relationships with individuals? It's through communication, the most important being a conversation of some kind or another. Conversations are about, well, they should be about understanding. One cannot create services or change services without understanding the needs, lives, wants, desires of the users. Indeed, that's how we got the NHS. You know, if you want the best example of a human learning system from its inception, think about the story of the people in Tredegar, you know, who designed what we now know to be the NHS. There's been some bumps on the way, but I think it's a good example of learning, understanding, doing, but returning the loop to the individual at the centre. So I don't know whether we call it human learning systems or better services to the public. It's about improvement. It's about improving services for people, with people. It's about joining up. It's also about, in the current context, power. And, you know, in my experience, I've designed and been involved in services that have applied the principles of HLS and have used other ways of engaging people. The reason why we haven't, and it's just a hypothesis to be tested, probably wrong, usually I am, about why human HLS isn't the sort of default way in which we do things across services to the public, is partly because you hit the barrier, which is power, and about, you know, who has power. in a system, who has power over the system, and how is that power applied to whom and why. And those are often values judgments and values things. But I'm intrigued about getting to scale. How do you make HLS the way as opposed to our way? Because it should be obvious if you think about it, that if you're going to design or indeed deliver services, there is only one way, and that is the human way. So how do we engage with humans? We tend to learn. So it seems to me to be pretty basic, pretty fundamental, and it's the and yet I'm interested in. And I'm hoping that I might get some insight and learn as much as we all will from the speakers that we have. You're what it's all about. You do this, you're on the front line, you engage with it, you struggle with it, you get frustrated by its slow pace, and sometimes hang on as it jerks you into the future with the most, with aggression and certainty. But I think that's what makes it all exciting, actually. If you're going to engage with complexity, then one of its conditions is that you're going to be surprised. It's going to challenge you, and it should, because you're dealing with, in many services, the quality of people's lives. So I want us to build a movement, and let's face it, in Britain 2022, we need new movements. We need movements that engage people with things they can do as opposed to things that they can't or being told that they shouldn't do. We need systems and tools that give people energy and give them control and give them insight and give them the ability to change their lives from the inside out. I often say to people who seek guidance from government, I say, don't look up so much. You get a crick neck, look out. That's where the answers lie. That's where the answers have always lay. So I'm looking forward to a rich conversation. If we look at the NHS, if we look across public services, actually services to the public in every sector, the outcomes tend to be heading in the wrong direction. But everybody on this call, and many of you will have heard me say this before, everybody on this call is far, far too lucky to be pessimistic. And because we're too lucky to be pessimistic, we have to provide the optimism and the answers and the solutions and the questions that drive us forward and drive our colleagues forward and drive our communities forward. Because there isn't a plan B, basically. We either get this right now or we continue with a steady decline of things that we hold dear. And it's that important. It's that important. So HLS Week should be the start of something. It should be the start of a movement. It should be the start of building a future for how services need to work, must work for everyone on this call, our families, our friends, and our communities. And I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for listening.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Victor. And hopefully you'll be able to stay for long enough to take some questions if we get a chance later.
How long about?
Yeah, let me move on. So now for our speakers, all of whom, as I said earlier, share a commitment to HLS, have been on the journey with those of us who've been working on HLS over the past few years. They all represent different sorts of organisations and therefore quite different perspectives. So first we're going to hear from Cathy Evans. Cathy is the Chief Exec of Children England, which is the umbrella body for children's charities in England. And those of you who know Cathy or even just follow her on Twitter will know that it has been tirelessly pushing the case for a radical overhaul of support for children for years, and has been involved in the development of HLS from its earliest days. Second, we'll hear from Gary Wallace from Plymouth Council. Again, great champion of HLS and somebody from whose practice we've learnt so much. He's played a leading role in transforming Plymouth's services for people who are facing really difficult life circumstances over several years. And, we really have been working alongside Gary since the very beginning. And finally, we'll hear from Alex Palmer from Liverpool City Region Combined Authority, where over the past few years, they've been taking a very intentional HLS approach from the start of the commissioning process for support for people experiencing homelessness. And Alex is at the forefront of developing and testing the practice of systems stewardship in this new approach. And I'm sure that she will explain what that means. And if she doesn't, we'll come back to it. We've given them only 5 minutes each, so I know that's a bit unfair and it's not very long for the amazing practice that they're all involved with, but we will have a bit of time for questions, hopefully, in which case we can sort of expand some of this. But everyone's going to talk about why HLS matters to them, and then describe what that HLS practice looks and feels like in their context. And we've asked each of them to focus on a particular dimension of HLS, so the human, the learning, and the system. So I'm going to hand over to Kathy first. Kathy, what does HLS mean to you?
Thanks, Anna. Well, I could start by telling you the journey that Children England has been on as a charity since I took over. 10 years ago, we were contracted up to our eyeballs. We were monitoring KPIs every month. We were measuring our impact in ways that we knew was not authentic, but was necessary for the terms that we'd accepted for the funding and the role that we'd taken on. We lost all of that overnight when I took over. And while not personal, I made not going back to it a bit of a mission. And I'll say a bit more, but so as a charity, not a service delivery charity, but nonetheless, a very old, proud charity whose mission is for children and for charities. We've been on an HLS journey. We now have no KPIs. We don't sell services and deliver transactions. We are on a mission for children, for society. I could also then start by going into what I'm sure all of you would recognise, and you will be hearing plenty of it from other sessions today. What I heard and was asked to try and tackle by my members back at the beginning of the last decade was the ruin that was being brought to children's services by competition. It was ruining a sector that had a long, proud history of collaboration by setting us against each other, by setting us in opposition and kind of combat and tension with our public sector colleagues and commissioners, in which no one was to be trusted, everything had to be proven. Data is what will prove that you're an honest broker, and learning from the best of what we do is an asset to be traded, not a wisdom to be shared. My members were starting to make really quite fantastical claims about their ability to change a life that they'd been involved in for 6 months or a year. All of us knew this is not true. Everyone who goes into practice with children knows that a childhood is 20 years and that it is created by the child themselves, by their life experience, by their family, and that if services can do something to help, then that is a goal. But it is not, you don't own or deliver the outcome of being better than you were before service engagement. So these are recognizable things. These are the things that drew us to develop what we call the Declaration of Interdependence, to reframe and to declare a new path, which was about collaboration and just deciding not to allow the attrition that was being caused to children's services, to the quality of them, to the finance of them, to the sector and the collaboration and the learning that needed to happen. We just decided to declare this is nonsensical. So we must overcome the drivers towards competition and work with our friends and our colleagues in the public sector who we know have a shared mission. Can we find our shared mission, our shared purpose, and commit to collaborate selflessly rather than to compete self-interestedly? So that's the journey that I set out on, and I was asked by my members to see if we could do anything to change the competitive culture. And I definitely don't claim that we've done it on our own, but our contribution, my being part of the HLS founders, was entirely about seeing that from a long way off, and that was something that the charity sector could see and felt powerless to do anything about. But I've been asked to speak about the human bit of human learning systems, and I just want to put in a pitch for why I think if you're child-centered, this is a no-brainer, because every single person in this Zoom room, the only universal truth of all human existence is that you start as a child. It doesn't mean that you have the same childhood. In fact, you know, the fact that we all end up unique is proof that no two childhoods are the same. But that's the complexity. But complexity is not chaos. We have patterns that we can learn. There is wisdom about how to navigate complexity, and in childhood it is universal. All of us, I'm sure, would want to give credit to the health system or to the school that we went to in some degree for who we are today, but there is absolutely no way that they produced us. And it is very common for people to understand I became who I am despite a poor service or being ignored or being mistreated by those services, that want to claim credit for who I am today. This is how fundamentally we can understand and connect with the fact that services do not deliver outcomes, right? Every single one of us, if anyone asks what made you who you are today, it would be your experience of being a child. It is your experience of childhood. And if you gave credit to one service before you gave credit or an account to your family, it would be bizarre. We would all find it very unnatural. So human beings are interdependent first and foremost with each other and with their context and the life experience that they go through. And that continues to be true throughout all of our lives. Our childhood, however long you live, will be the oldest part of you for however long you get to stay around. And so how much of, even if you don't work in children's services, how much of what you need to bring to the issues and the problems that people have today is rooted in their childhood, is rooted in us not creating the right conditions and the right responses to the human experience of being dependent, interdependent on other people, and to the fact that no family really can do it on their own either. So in childhood, we see a norm that public service is essential to a healthy childhood. Every child should have a GP and the benefits of health, because every child is going to be ill at some point. Every child should have teachers. So, you know, these are the counter to the deficit model that we have created about public services being what dysfunctional people need. So we can rework the humanity of our system from our common humanity of being children once, and understanding that the nature of human being is interdependence with each other. We need each other, and we always will. And if we start from that principle that it is natural and human to need other people and to need help at times, then we have to start from a human understanding of what public service is. And it is something which we can't pathologize. It is the essence of being human. And so if we are each other's answer, then the answers to what public services should be can only be found in dialogue with each other, in our relationships with each other. I'm afraid to say that I can't tell you that children's services is at the vanguard of trying human learning systems. To my great shame, I think it should be. But one of the exemplars of the problem that we have is that we have ended up, we'll hear a lot about positive error culture, risk aversion, transactional accountability, thinking that if it's written in the contract, we've covered this off. Nobody makes mistakes with children. And it's really natural for us not to be blasé about public services making mistakes in children's lives. But we have to disabuse ourselves of it, because, as I said, breaking up a child into service units and specialist needs is unnatural. It's inhuman, and it makes services responsible for human beings in a way that we can never deliver. So I'm just gonna wind up by saying that the journey that Children England has been on, it's taken me 10 years to get us independently funded with people who only fund us to meet our mission. And where that's led us to is that we are now deep in three years in to young people redesigning the welfare state for us, not just so that it works for children, but that it's so that it works better for everyone, because they have all the expertise that's needed to do that, because they've grown up in a society where they've experienced those systems and they know how they could be better. And I can't think of a better example of what trusting in being human can lead to.
Thank you so much, Kathy. And I can see people in the chat commenting on how refreshing and energizing it is to hear from you speak always. In a way, I mean, that's just a brilliant place to start HLS Week, because it's just taking us right back to first principles about what it is to be human and where public services sit in that wider landscape in our lives. And it's almost kind of staggering that we need to go back there in order to move forward again. Those kind of basic principles about interdependence and what makes for a good life, family, connection, as well as services which are not there to sort of serve a deficit model, but are there as a part of what makes that positive kind of tapestry, and it enables people to thrive. So thank you so much. I know there's also a couple of questions for you in the chat. I think people are really interested in how you kind of overcome some of the kind of other ways of thinking about public services, which might be often described as new public management, or sorry, somebody's put in there managers matrix and metrics and markets. Maybe we can come back to that in the conversation, but also Gary, you might have some thoughts about that in your remarks. So let me hand over to you, Gary, and welcome you to the session. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. So I'm just going to start with a little bit of my own learning, which is I probably shouldn't put the washing on before I started to do this, because I'm now playing Russian roulette with a spin cycle. But so obviously I'm focusing on learning, and in particular a particular aspect of learning that we do, which you might kind of categorize as learning through storytelling. So obviously we still kind of read research, and we look at other areas that are doing things, and we steal good ideas from other people on the basis that the early bird gets the worm, but the second mouse gets the cheese. But so I'm going to start really by telling you our story of how we kind of got into what became Human Learning Systems. At the time, we didn't have those words for it. So our journey in Plymouth started with a failed lottery bid, and as part of the preparation for that bid, we did 3 or 4 months of really large scale co-production, what we would now call co-production. And we spoke to over 900 people. We spoke to people that use services, we spoke to their carers, their relatives, people working in services, commissioners. I was myself a commissioner at the time. We spoke to leaders in the city. And essentially, they told us what we already suspected, which was that the model we were using at the time, outcome-based commissioning, whatever you want to call it, new public management, wasn't working. So we kind of already had this idea that it wasn't working. But in in the months of co-production that we did, we spoke to people one-to-one. We held loads of mass events. We had focus groups. We kind of iteratively went back to people. What we learned is that not only was it not working, it was actively causing harm to people. It was causing harm to staff. It was causing harm to people that use services. It wasn't really working for anybody. And we prepared our bid. And I think my memory is that when we were writing the bid, we were thinking this might be a bit radical. It's, kind of, we've not really heard this stuff before. Should we adjust it, to get the money, because it was 2012 and it was a time of kind of peak austerity, or austerity was just beginning. But I think all of us, so it's myself and 10 chief execs of VCSD services, felt no, we'd kind of learned so much. We had to kind of stick by our guns and put the bid in, and we did, and we duly didn't get the bid. But it was such a kind of transformational journey for everybody that myself, I was the associate DPH at the time, and the 10 chief execs met every Friday morning for a year to try and kind of begin to promote change in our city, regardless of the money, and not getting the lottery money. And I think that our resolve was that we have learned so extensively the myriad ways that the way we're doing things unintentionally causes harm to people, that we can no longer be complicit in doing things which cause people harm. And eventually we a little kind of space opened us for it to experiment, which kind of develops into the Plymouth Alliance for Complex Needs. So really, I'm going to sort of focus on learning through listening, rather than kind of more formal ways of learning and training and workforce development and all those kind of things. So that's been the most transformational thing that we have done in Plymouth, is these really extensive, this is kind of really kind of slavish dedication to learning through listening. The kind of key technique we use for that is appreciative inquiry, which I'll talk about later, but there are lots of other forms of listening going on, but essentially it's about going out and listening at a kind of mass level. So we have mass co-productions where we see hundreds of people over several days. It's about kind of smaller stuff where you might go to a community or an interest group and do kind of iterative learning. Or it might just be a very, very small school. One of the really kind of most transformational things we did were with children that there's a diagnosis called morbidly obese. There were only 10 children with that diagnosis, and we did some really kind of deep listening to their families, which was absolutely transformational to the entire system around children and their weight issues. So the point about learning through listening is the process of doing it is as important as the stories we hear. So our practice in learning through listening, let's say we were going to a system, is to teach everybody in the system to do appreciative inquiry, everybody from the chief executive to the lowest paid worker, to people with lived experience, to their carers, and to pair people up together so that they go and listen in pairs or triads. So they witness things together. So one of our kind of bits of practical learning is very often services will really kind of believe they have a unique selling point. They have a thing, a magic thing, which makes a huge difference to people. Quite often when we go and ask people about that, they tell them actually it makes their life worse. Now it's really easy to get services to start doing things. We all like to start doing things. It's quite hard to get them to stop. If people have witnessed things together, then 6 months down the line, I can say to that chief executive, do you remember when all those people told us that thing you like makes their life worse? Now's the time to stop. They're much more likely to stop if we've kind of witnessed that together. But also the process of groups of people listening together creates empathy, because empathy is a really kind of key thing in building trust. And as someone else said, not me, I wish I had said it, is change happens at the speed of trust. It's a really key principle, is to build empathy and trust across the system in order to, that's essentially becomes your platform for change. So kind of going back through learning through listening, the other thing we do is learning through doing. So we have a process where we would be doing kind of a mass bit of learning, mass bit of appreciative inquiry. We might do hundreds of appreciative inquiries, and then we do all the sense making in groups together, and that kind of tells us, and that might be my spin cycle, that kind of tells us we need the kind of things we need to do, and the kind of the parallel process then is to give everybody in the system the permission or power, however you want to phrase that, to try things. So one of the things we learned in the original round of learning during the failed lottery bid was the kind of the way practice has become highly routinized. It's based on thresholds, it's based on targets, and essentially you have all these really well trained, really experienced staff reduced to engaging in conversations which are about pattern recognition, where they match a set of symptoms to a set of packaged bits of care, and people don't really fit routinized packages of care. It's really frustrating for the staff, it's really frustrating for the people, and actually we'd reached a point where most of that meant people were denied services. So if you want to make thresholds and boundaries between services and within services fuzzy and permeable, so they work for people. Yeah, the only way you can do that is to empower the public facing staff to exercise discretion, and a good way to kind of create that sense of shared endeavor you need for people to do that is by giving them permission to try things. So in our systems, people have the permission to experiment and make it really easy for people to try things. The only kind of request is that they gather the learning. They don't have to do a business case for it. They can, if 2 workers and 2 services want to try something, they're allowed to try it. And that creates this a much more thoughtful process for workers. I'm not suggesting people don't think under the old system or didn't think under the old system, but it's a much more kind of thoughtfulness is much more valued in a human learning system approach, and it recognizes that very often the experiments themselves raise the dissonance between what workers think is happening and what's actually happening. So it was a very interesting thing where we did a round of appreciation inquiry with people in addiction services, and we asked workers what the theory was around what they were doing, and they would all tell us their theory, and then we would say, well, you've been doing this for 10 years, what have you learned? And then they would tell us all the ways that the theory didn't appear to be making sense in real life. They couldn't predict who was going to desist, and yeah, it just wasn't the way the theory said it was. And that's a really kind of important thing for creating dissonance, that you suddenly confront people with, actually, this is the theory, it doesn't appear to be working, and there's let's try something else, really, which is based on people's lived experience. So I'm going to kind of finish with talking a little bit more about appreciative inquiry. So appreciative inquiry, the reason we use it is really easy to teach people to do. It's really easy to do, and it's been for us the kind of most transformational thing, most transformational tool we've deployed. It kind of moves everybody, and the way we do it is, and you can kind of Google it, it's this whole website's about it, is, as I say, we pair people up, or we put people in groups, and they go and ask really open questions. Tell us about your family, tell us about your life, tell us about your perfect day, tell us about your nightmare day, tell us about your typical day. So rather than what we would have done before, which was to say, tell us how we can improve our service. Because what you find is when you give people the opportunity to talk about what's important to them, they very rarely talk about services. They talk about being connected, they talk about poverty, they talk about trauma, they talk all those kind of things that we talk about in our own lives. So it's been a really kind of moving and transformational way for people to gather learning. So let's say we would gather, I don't know, 50, 60 stories, and then we read them aloud in groups. We write them up in the first person, and we read them aloud in groups. The reason we write them in the first person is, if I can get the words of another person in your mouth in the first person, it builds empathy in a way that it doesn't if it's written in the third person. So this is all about reminding people that we're all humans together, that we all have the same motivations, the same challenges, the same kind of emotional responses. And it's a way of mitigating the kind of othering that new public management does. The idea of us and them, me the expert, you the person with the deficit. So we would read them aloud in groups, and then we kind of make sense of them. We try to identify broad themes, individual themes, and that then tells us what we need to do, which goes back to the learning through doing, through trying things. So what we find is that appreciative inquiry builds understanding because we do it together, and it builds empathy because we do it together. But it also gives us a legitimacy because we talk to lots and lots of people. And the kind of consequence of that is, what we consistently find is we're amplifying the voices of the unheard. And in doing that, we are modifying the voices of the noisy and powerful, because often the only voices you hear are the voices of the powerful. But if we can say, well, actually, here's 60 other people with lived experience, and this is what they're saying, it's a really kind of effective way of resetting systems around what actually needs to be done. And the other thing is, when people tell you their stories, they essentially tell you what value looks like in their life. So, and what we're trying to do in Plymouth is try and help people create value in their life rather than quantitative proxy targets, which are largely about saving money. It's much more a focus on what would value look like for you, and how can we as a set of commissioners and services help you create that in your life. And I think I'll pause there just before the spin cycle.
Perfect. Thanks, Gary. And again, I'm just sitting here afresh, kind of thinking, why is it radical that we're talking about things like listening, empathy, understanding, behaving like humans? I'm also struck by the fact that you've picked up, as well as Kathy in her remarks, the fact that the way that we were doing it before, the way you were doing it before, wasn't working for anyone. I mean, it's not working. Like no one's enjoying this. No one's getting out of it what they need. Not the people that you're trying to help, or the people who are trying to do the helping. So, you know, why is it so difficult that we create these kind of changes in how we work? Maybe that's something for us to come back to. But let me hand over to Alex now, who's going to share her story from Liverpool. Over to you, Alex.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks, Gary and Kathy. Not quite sure how I'm going to follow that, but I'll give it a go. So I've been asked to kind of focus on the systems aspect of human learning systems, and to do that I'm going to give a bit of context as to what my role is as systems steward within an assertive outreach service, and then kind of go through why human learning systems is important to me, but also to the service and what that looks like and how it changes the way in which we operate. So as you all know, my name's Alex Farmer, and I work for the Liverpool City Region Combined Authority. I sit in the homelessness policy team within commissioning and contracts. And over the last 2 years, nearly 3, my primary role has been as overseer or system steward of an assertive outreach service for rough sleepers, which has been delivered across the Liverpool City region. So as an assertive outreach service, we work to meet individuals rough sleeping at their point of need and crisis. So the team's main focus is on walking the streets of the boroughs in which we deliver early in the morning to try and identify individuals who might be street living. They then work to engage with these individuals, building relationships to meet their immediate needs, and work alongside the local authority and other organisations to bring these individuals indoors. Our service utilises a human learning systems approach to delivery and to contract management specifically. This means that both the provider and I, as the commissioner, take a flexible approach to service delivery and development, and focus on incorporating learning into our kind of day-to-day operations and communications. And then we try and use this learning as much as we can to influence the wider systems change around homelessness pathways across the boroughs in which we work. So this service design was kind of achieved by including at service specification level within the contract, the commissioning process, the human learning systems approach. This was pioneered by my colleague Katie Fleeman. I can't take any credit for that. She was with the Combined Authority before me, and she worked to develop a commissioning group across the city region at the time of the inception of the service, which was back in 2018. This provided an opportunity to share with local authorities about human learning systems and what we kind of hoped we would gain by integrating this approach into this service, and how it might lend itself for us to be able to develop a rough sleeper service which was flexible and adaptive across the lifetime of a contract. From that starting point, I was then recruited to be a system steward for this service. I don't come from a commissioning background. I don't come from a homelessness background. I'd never heard of human learning systems. I guess for me, that was actually a great point for me to start. Helps with me being able to kind of take a fresh approach, maybe some might say, or an ignorant approach, others might say, to trying to implement this practice. So why does human learning systems matter in practice? How does it influence the system, and particularly how does it work for rough sleepers? So for me, I have to say human learning systems matters in practice because it enables all the actors within an intervention to come together and share their expertise, often displacing the traditional power dynamics within a professional setting. Human learning systems requires every actor to be committed to the approach and invest time in building honest relationships, reflecting using a learning lens, and to be aware and analytical of the wider system within which they're working and how it might impact them and others. And I found by asking people to commit to these principles, you can often highlight key areas of expertise amongst colleagues who may not, in a traditional kind of commissioner-provider relationship, have come to light or felt like they could share their expertise. So how it works for us in our service is that I work really hard with the provider to create spaces for our frontline team to share their expertise so that they can utilise their experience of delivery to help inform our understanding of client need and service development as we go, as we are implementing this service, as we're working with colleagues, as we're trying to support people who are off sleeping. I do this by regularly going out on outreach with the team and organising kind of regular learning framework sessions as a group where they can take time to reflect communally. Without these opportunities, I, as the commissioner within this system, definitely wouldn't have been able to understand some of the challenges affecting individuals rough sleeping, but also some of the challenges that affect our service provider and how they're able to develop and deliver the service. So, for example, if I didn't go on outreach, I wouldn't quite have understood the size of the geography of the areas that our service is covering, and how imperative it is that they work collaboratively with other services so that they can try and find individuals who are rough sleeping. I wouldn't have really understood the massive impact poor intelligence from self-referrals of individuals rough sleeping can have on their ability to find somebody who is rough sleeping and how much resource that can take. They wouldn't have shared with me the difference that they're experiencing in the way in which men and women rough sleep and how services might need to start to adapt to that difference. And I definitely wouldn't have been able to see quite how valuable it is to have a service that is flexible and adaptive when it comes to supporting individuals, not just from at their point of crisis, living on the streets, but as they move and transition into temporary accommodation. And I have to say our team's ability to be a consistent approach, and for us to say that it's okay that they continue to support individuals once we've technically got them from rough sleeping into that pathway, like how important and valuable that consistency has been in preventing people from re-entering the streets. So that's just one way. But it also matters in practice, human learning systems, because it commits the commissioner to putting the money where their mouth is. We can't talk the talk about human learning systems without walking the walk. And I have to say, using this approach has allowed and expects us to get invested and give time to the operational challenges that face service delivery. At the end of the day, we've committed to trying to ensure that we don't commission services which don't work. So if there are blockages, or we feel there are practices which are creating a service which isn't effective to meeting the needs of our service users, then it is important that we work alongside our provider to support with wider systems change. One of the ways we'd look to do this to support our team is to support our team when there have been operational blockages, and so to bring agencies around the table to find solutions through MDTs, which I or colleagues from the LCR will chair. Obviously, MDTs aren't multi-agency or multidisciplinary team meetings aren't like an unusual practice at all. But as a commissioner, supporting in the operational delivery of the service through strategic routes has proven to be particularly valuable to our provider and our service users, along with our partners, as they can see the time and commitment that we're willing to invest to ensure that the service and the wider system works for our service users. It is and can be really simple, but often in this area of work, many organisations and services are stretched, and being able to coordinate and facilitate this type of conversation and being able to offer that support has been really positive in building effective collaborative partnerships across the wider homelessness pathway. And it's also enabled our provider to feel confident in coming to us to raise kind of issues or identify systems barriers that they've found throughout their work day to day, and ask us to help them in troubleshooting those problems, which is brilliant. That's one of the things I enjoy the most, is when they're able to come to us and we can actually work together to find a creative solution. So by being willing to invest time into supporting systems change and create space for problem solving, we've found that this has influenced our partners, those who support delivery or are receiving the assertive outreach service. We found in taking this approach with consent from local authorities, they tend to be really engaged and committed to supporting the practice. We've particularly seen this in the way they have engaged with building positive partnerships with the service provider and wider collaborative relationships. This can and does have a really positive impact on individuals within the homeless population. Recently, we've worked with a particularly complex individual. I honestly can't stress that enough. Particularly complex individual who's been rough sleeping for many years, and through the committed multi-agency approach and the willingness of all services within that local authority to be adaptive and flexible, the team have managed to get this individual indoors. And I think that's testament to the human learning systems approach and the way it can influence the wider working culture within a system. I've got loads of things and examples I could talk about with regards to kind of human learning systems in practice and how it can influence the system, but I'm really conscious of everybody's time. And if you do want to hear more, tomorrow we're speaking with our provider, so you can hear from them firsthand about how they find experiencing and delivering in a human learning systems way. So I'll leave it there if that's all right, Anna.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thanks so much, Alex. And it's interesting because some of the early kind of questions and observations that were in the chat were about, you know, how do we get managers and procurement colleagues and commissioners to kind of think differently about what's possible, but you've just sort of set that out so clearly. And again, I'm just struck by, in a sense, like the simplicity of it, that we can work in a different way, and you've shown that it is possible. I'm conscious of time, and I'm conscious also that Victor and Kathy have to hop off in a moment to go to other engagements. I just thought, Victor, I might give you a quick opportunity to come back with any thoughts or observations on anything that you've heard from our speakers so far. And then perhaps you might want to just share any reflections that you've got about, well, what is stopping us? Why is it radical to sit on a call and hear about these amazing examples of practice, which in themselves are actually quite simple?
I need to comment on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, excuse me. Actually, there is a reason why it's difficult. The power thing is, I say that, but you know, if the system isn't changing, it's because people are benefiting from the status quo. I mean, basically, and excuse me, I'm recovering from a bit of a chest infection. I get 3 every year, and I always get them when I'm about to do something like this. And we have to be honest with ourselves about that as a fact. Because if we're not honest with ourselves about it, then we can't have the right conversations. So with the people who do have power, and I'm always struck by the campaigning zeal of people with new ideas when they approach those in power, or the status quo, for want of a better word, in that they go into campaign mode and they proselytize for this new idea or this new approach. And the problem with that is that those people tend to be quite skeptical and cynical about new ideas because they're benefiting from the old idea. And so one has to really think about how you approach power, and you have to apply empathy. For those of you that are interested in this kind of thing, there's a wonderful little book by a woman called Judy Fee Glaser on intelligent conversations about how you work with people and get their prefrontal cortex engaged as opposed to their amygdala. Anna, you'll have heard this before, for which I apologise. But I think there's something about being honest about the conditions and about what power is and how it operates, and engaging with it in the same way you would engage with any system challenge, in a sense. But that's the reason we haven't got to scale. It's because power benefits from the status quo.
Thanks, Victor. And I think Kathy wants to come in with a quick comment before she has to leave.
Yeah, I just want to, you know, the fact that there is so much complexity and it's interwoven with power and inertia. So I similarly find that even the people who look powerful in the systems that we're asking to change often feel like they don't have the power needed to change the system. So that empathy with people's constraint in the current system, even if they look like they're the ones who could do more than you could to change it, we will build connection by recognizing that we're all disempowered by this system, and that we could choose to organize it differently. And I think that's the inspiring thing about Plymouth and Liverpool. But I just wanted to leave with a thought, because the complexity thing can be really bewildering. And one of the functions of the current way of doing things is that we're drowning in knowledge, in information. We're literally, commissioners are drowning in so much monitoring data that they can't actually tell what's happening to the service users. you know, and it one of the ways that human beings tell the difference between knowledge and wisdom, you know, is that with, you know, knowledge is something that you kind of have to devote yourself to and absorb. Wisdom, you know the truth of it as soon as you hear it. It's a real kind of evolutionary sort of bypass button on needing to learn stuff, because if you can get to the wisdom that sits in human experience, you know that it's true when you hear it. So what is the difference? The knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is knowing it doesn't go in a fruit salad. And everyone, like, there's nothing, I don't want to disabuse anyone about knowledge. It's important, and it's an important way to challenge what we assume. There is a lot of wisdom about the human condition and about good practice and about how people's lives and conditions of life can be changed that we have disregarded. And a lot of it lies in listening, as Gary described so powerfully, to the people who have it and hard learnt it. So I'm sorry that I have to go. I've got an HLS session with my membership. But I'm delighted that everyone is so interested, and I'm totally up for more contact.
Thanks, Kathy. And thanks, Victor. I know you're going to have to hop off as well. I am meant to be handing over to my colleague in a moment, but I'm just going to allow just one more opportunity for either of our other speakers to come back with any further thoughts. I thought, Alex, it was really interesting what you said in the beginning of your remarks about how being a bit new to the work was a sort of advantage. You know, you weren't kind of steeped in the old way of thinking about things. But Gary, you had been around for longer and have sort of found a way to change the system from within. So do either of you want to comment on that question about sort of power and perspective and empathy, and how you kind of work with colleagues to start to shift things in a different direction?
It kind of goes back to this idea of dissonance. So Victor's absolutely right. You often find yourself in a position where you're saying to a senior leader, you know, that thing you're really good at, the thing that got you this this very large salary, well, it's a bit rubbish. But there are a lot of leaders, and certainly aspirant leaders, that they're looking for a new thing. They're looking for something which will mark them out as distinct and progressive. We work quite hard to find those people, because I go back to this idea that most people instinctively know the way we're doing things, or the way we were doing things, isn't really working. So it's about how you kind of go through a process of guided discovery, where you're helping people see that you're not wagging a finger, because no one is deliberately causing harm. Everybody, you know, new public management, it was, when it came in, it was about making things better. Everybody thought it was going to make things better, and it was going to be a good thing. So no one's kind of deliberately doing this, and lots of the harms you see, no one's deliberately saying let's be harmful. It's just the kind of consequences of the way we've organised things. So it's about involving people in processes where my core belief is, if I can show someone the things that moved me, they will be moved too, because people that work in public services, or people that work in the VCSC, by and large, they're in those things because they want to do good things. So if I can show them how the way we're kind of unconsciously doing bad things, they will be moved by that too. And I repeatedly find that that's true. So it is about how you engage with people around their dissonance, how you maintain that dissonance, how you in a way which is not, you know, you're not saying gotcha, you know, I'm going to catch you out. It's a much more, this is the human bit of human learning systems. It's collaborative. It's about a shared endeavor. It's about making everybody feel a sense of ownership and partnership in this kind of journey we're going to set off on. And blame is a really unproductive thing. It's much more about encouraging and supporting and guiding, rather than a more kind of didactic finger wagging, holier than thou approach. Because we were all doing this, you know, a couple of decades ago, we were all doing outcome-based performance management and thinking it was a great thing. And yeah, so that's my thing, is kind of be generous, be open, be collegiate, and people will come with you. They will be moved by what you were moved by.
Yeah, I think there's something in there. It kind of boils down to be human in how you think about how you create change, as well as the change that you are trying to create, if you know what I mean. The sort of process and the intent and the outcome are the same thing when working with colleagues as well as with working with anyone else. Alex, do you want to have just a quick final word?
Yeah, sure. And sorry if I repeat anything that Gary said, but I think for me in the work I'm doing, obviously the commissioner-provider relationship traditionally is quite hierarchical, and you do have that power structure embedded, don't you, where the big scary commissioner comes to see what the provider's up to, and a bit like you're testing to check that everything's going well. But for me in the last few years, I think learning's been the great equaliser, and where I think we've been able to shift that power dynamic has often come from that place of understanding that I as the commissioner or systems steward within this partnership is learning also, and being able to be upfront about my limitations and my understanding, and also just has been really helpful in building those honest relationships with our provider and partners. But also I think it's been showing we're in this contract, we're very fortunate that I have the space and time to spend as much time as I do with our service. I know that that's not the same for lots of people who are in this type of role, but being able to kind of go shoulder to shoulder with our provider and get down and dirty and go out and do outreach with them has really helped to kind of show not just the manager that we want to listen and learn, but actually the people doing the job, that we do really care about their experience, and obviously those of the service users that they're trying to support. And I just think personally for me that's been a really beneficial way of shifting that power dynamic, so that people feel like they can share that expertise that they've got, and they can highlight their frustrations as practitioners around where aspects of the system don't work, and highlight those intersections where different systems might come together for an individual experiencing homelessness, health, for example, or with adult social care, and there are blockages, without feeling potentially that they're betraying colleagues or betraying the work that they're doing by saying that there's an issue. So I think that for me is definitely, the learning aspect, as much as we can focus on it, has been a really helpful kind of equaliser in that dynamic.
Brilliant.
So that's all I'd add.
Thank you. So that's so many practical tips in this conversation: listening, finding empathy for your colleagues, identifying where there's dissonance, working with it, tapping into the intrinsic motivation of everybody to do the right thing. People don't come into these jobs on the whole to try to cause harm, and learning as a great equalizer across the system. I think that those are really powerful tips. Thank you so much to all of you for sharing with us this afternoon. And I'm going to hand over to my colleague Dawn, and she's going to talk a little bit more with Naomi about what's happening this week. But before I do, I just want to acknowledge that Dawn is one of the original authors of the Human.Learning.Systems reports alongside Toby Lowe. So we're also really lucky to have her with us, and she's got an enormous amount of knowledge and wisdom about all of this. But let me hand over to you, Dawn, to talk about this week.
Thanks, Anna, and thanks, Alex, Gary, Kathy. That was brilliant to hear those stories that have really evolved so much over the years and have been so important in shaping HLS into what it is. So I'm Dawn, I'm from Collaborate. As a quick audio description, I'm a white woman with curly brown hair. I'm wearing a turquoise top. And if I didn't have a HLS background behind me, you'd see a bookshelf with a plant that's just gone crazy and is taken over my living room. So I'm going to talk briefly about the purpose of HLS Week. You've got a bit of a taster into what HLS is, how it's been used in practice, and that really is what the rest of the week is about. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why we're here, what it's all about, and then I'll hand over to Naomi, who will walk us through the week a bit, the specific sessions that are on offer. So before we get started, while we're talking, we'd love to hear from you about what you're looking to get out of the week. So as you can see, Naomi's just popped a question in the chat. We're going to use Mentimeter just to get a sense of what you're all looking for from the week. So if you could follow the link in the chat, go to menti.com and use the code 41122789. And then when you get there, you share your response to that question. Feel free to carry on typing as we're talking, and then towards the end we'll share all of your responses and get a flavour of what colleagues on the call are looking for from the week. So we'll leave that running in the background. So thinking about the purpose of HLS Week, I was kind of reflecting on my own personal experiences, which chimes with a lot of what's already been discussed today, about what I've got out of other similar opportunities to connect with others in the HLS community, like Kathy, like Gary, like Alex. And I suppose my sense of dissonance, building on what Gary just said, my sense of dissonance started quite early on in my career. I worked in grant making as one of my first jobs. And it didn't make sense to me. We were supposed to be providing funding to help people in communities. But as a funder, I was working in a way that I just knew was damaging. We were working in a way where we exerted lots of control as a funder, and we thought by exerting control, that would lead to better outcomes for people and communities. So for us, success for a project we funded was sticking to the plan, sticking to the budget, achieving measurable outcomes that were attributed to them as a single organisation. It was about us signing off and giving permission as a funder if any change needed to happen. But I just knew this was undermining the change we were trying to support. I knew the organisations that were ticking the boxes weren't the best organisations, the ones who, when I went out to visit them, building the best relationships, really building trust and empathy, were really collaborative, were continually adapting their work. So it was that dissonance between the practice I was doing and my experience of what good looked like that just didn't make sense to me. So it's through being involved in what became Human Learning Systems and working with the brilliant organisations that's inspired it, that's given me so much. So I guess there's three main takeaways I've had. Firstly, that it's not just me feeling this way. It can feel really lonely, particularly, and as a junior person just started in grant making, I thought I was just asking stupid questions. So that sense that it's not just me, it's not just grant making. New public management shapes public services and beyond. And that realisation that we need to shift from that illusion of control to really embrace complexity. That is the reality of all of our lives. So that was something really important I've got from HLS. And linked to that the ability to connect with others facing similar challenges in their role, that sense of community, that sense of what Gary calls collective bravery. So with that sense of we're in this together, none of us really know the answers, but we can test, learn, support each other along the way. And I guess when being part of the HLS community, it doesn't mean you get taught something, can you immediately go and apply it the next day? I think for me, it's about gaining inspiration that percolates, and then you can go and apply that to your specific context. And finally, I think being part of the HLS community, what's so exciting for me is bringing to life what different can look like. And it's about Human Learning Systems for me is about focusing on what good looks like for people and communities, and develop the ways of organising and managing from there, rather than this abstract process that's imposed top down. So for me, HLS Week is all about the fact none of us know the answers, but we know we need something different. So it's really a moment for us all to come together, to learn and share together, to advocate for something different together, and also that sense that different is possible, and supporting each other on that journey. We did have a few more formal aims for the week, so I'll just briefly share those before I hand over to Naomi. So firstly, as I've just mentioned, one of the key aims for HLS Week is fostering stronger connections within the community. It's an opportunity to connect with others grappling with similar questions. It might be connecting to people in similar fields, but I think what's particularly exciting is the opportunity to connect across different fields. So you might be a commissioner, you might be a community development worker, you might be someone who, like all of us, accesses public services and are coming with that lens. We've all got something to share. We've all got something to learn, whatever our position in a formal hierarchy, whether we've got formal power or not. So yeah, I really encourage you to share, as well as looking to gain learning from others. Secondly, HLS is all about trying to grow our understanding of HLS practice. So many questions we don't know the answers to. The practice is always evolving, and the practice is good as the questions we keep on asking ourselves to push those boundaries of thinking and practice. So the conversations we have here will shape what comes next with HLS in terms of action research. We really want to expand HLS into new audiences. So HLS started with the work of practitioners. So we want to continue to make sure we're reaching practitioners, we're hearing their stories, we're creating a platform for them to share. But also reaching into new audiences as well. So I'm particularly excited about the sessions we've got coming up about community development. So much of community development is just pure HLS, but we're really interested in how can we learn from community development? How can we create a platform? How can we help learners, funders and commissioners about what supports that kind of practice better. We're really focused on, during the week, trying to promote diversity and equity within the HLS community, within HLS thinking. We know, particularly being a practice that involves a lot of funders, commissioners, senior leaders, by our very nature, these fields often aren't that diverse in many different respects. So we want to be really intentional about who shapes HLS, ensure we involve diverse perspectives. We're definitely not there yet, but this week is one step on the way to trying to bring in some new perspectives, but also intentionally paying attention to equity and how we do HLS. HLS is a practice which can lend itself to more equitable practice, but only if we're really focused on that and ensuring it does respond to people's different circumstances and experiences. So we've got a number of sessions on diversity and equity throughout the week, which will be shaping the future of the work. We want to maintain accessibility through our language and our technologies. Theory is great, but actually it's about what we do in our day-to-day lives and day-to-day work, and we want to make sure it is accessible and real and human. And then finally, the week's all about celebrating HLS, about inspiring action. We want to give a platform to share these new ways of working, to connect, and for us to advocate together for a different approach. So I'm personally excited about this. Collaborate is also excited at the opportunity to create this platform to connect, along with all of our HLS collaborative members, along with all of our connections and friends in this work. So yeah, we hope you get a lot out of it, and we hope you become a member of the HLS community for the long term. And with that, I'll hand over to Naomi, who's going to give us a bit more of a practical sense of what sessions are on offer for the week.
Thanks, Dawn. Are you going to try and share the slide for me?
I'll do my best.
Okay, hopefully you're all already feeling super inspired by what we've heard just in the last hour. But I'm here to tell you that the rest of HLS week is going to be even more inspiring, informative, and hopefully challenging to you. So the programme is a mix of webinars, peer learning, networking sessions, and some of those are, some sessions provide a mix of all of those. So I'm going to do a quick overview of the week, just in case you've not really had a chance to figure out what else is happening. So as you can see, we've already got underway this morning with a couple of sessions, one on how we achieve systems change in public services in Cornwall. They've had a lunch and learn, and there's also been a session on what does service transformation from an H&S perspective really look like. We've got coming up in the week, we've got case studies of specific examples of HLS in action, for example, Gateshead, Liverpool, and the public sector transformation example. We've got sessions that focus just on one of the pillars of HLS, for example, relational leadership, learning partnerships, system stewardship. And we've got sessions exploring some of the really big challenges, such as how HLS can help us keep the promise in Scotland. And if you're from England and you're not sure what the promise is, then you can check out the description of that session. I think I'm sure that somebody's putting the link to the view of all the detailed view of all the sessions into the chat. So if you want to remind yourself, then please follow that and have a look. Although all our speakers today were from England, we've got 2 sessions from Scotland, and we even have one from Germany. If you do want to join the German session, it is going to be in German, so there may be a transcription, translation afterwards. We've got 2 sessions exploring how we embed equity, inclusion and diversity into the practice of HLS. An opportunity really to share your experiences and do some collective sense making on that really important topic. And if what you really want is just to connect with others that are trying to figure out how to embed or spread or just do HLS better, then do come along to our daily networking sessions. We've got sessions Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday. There'll be some one-to-one, some group chat, so bring a drink, relax for an hour or as long as you can spare. And on Thursday, our networking session has become a bit more of a kind of a learn and share. We'll have some input on HLS thinking in the health and social care field, along with some group discussions. On Friday, we've got our closing celebration. We invite you all to come along and share what you've gained, what you've learned, what you've created during the week, and to share in some collective thinking about where we go next with HLS. It'll be hosted by our partner, CPI, which is where Toby Lowe is based. He's another of the key kind of founders of the HLS work, one of the writers of, I think, all of the HLS reports. Other members of the HLS Collaborative will also be there to listen and take part in that conversation, so do come along to that if you can. And our final event of the week will be an HLS Learning Communities Taster session on Friday afternoon. HLS Learning Communities are a space for groups of people to come together regularly over a few months or longer to explore topics or themes that are relevant to HLS and to support each other. We currently have HLS learning communities for local authority folks, for social pedagogy folks, and for civil society folks. There's also an international learning community hosted by CPI. And some of these are contributing to HLS Week. For example, Alex is speaking with the local authority learning community tomorrow. And we've also run a community for folks who are exploring how to cultivate curiosity in HLS in their own contexts. So Friday's session will explain a bit more about how these learning communities can work, give you a taste of what it's like to be part of one, and to take some soundings on future topics or themes for learning communities that we could host or support over the next few months following HLS Week. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, do come along. And then bringing it back to today, this afternoon we have generative listening as a means to systems change with Andy Brogan starting at 3:30, and this afternoon's networking event starts at 5. So now, Dawn, would you just like to go back to the okay, no worries. That's going to just acknowledge before we share the Menti poll, just all of our partners and friends who are helping us deliver HLS Week. This is very much a kind of collaborative partnership event, and we're really grateful to all of these folks for hosting and speaking at events this week. So thank you to you all.
Thanks very much, Naomi. And I think it's my job to close the event. So I just want to say thank you so much, all of you, for coming. And I really hope that we'll see you at some more events through the week. Thanks, Naomi, for that overview. There's a feedback survey in the chat if you want to give us some feedback about the event. And if you want to sign up for any of those events that Naomi just described, then the Airtable link, I think, is also in the chat. So please do feel free. You can still sign up for anything that you want to come to. All of the transcripts and videos from the sessions are going to be available within a couple of weeks. So if you can't make it to something but you're interested, then you should still be able to get hold of the recording about the event. And if you want to contact any of our contributors from today or any other event, then I think many of them are willing to be contacted. Some of them are sharing their contacts in the chat. And if any of you are here and want to do that now, then feel free. But if not, then come to one of us at Collaborate and we can connect you. Because after all, that is what it's all about. So I just want to say thank you again to all of you. Thank you to our brilliant speakers. And I really hope that I'll see you at more events through the week. I'll see you there.